Yahuich. Hello, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. My name is Brigitta, and I'm the Executive Director of Montana World Trade Center. I also work with a coalition of organizations to help grow Montana bioscience. And on behalf of Montana World Trade Center, Montana High Tech Business Alliance, and its Executive Director, Christina Henderson, the World Trade Center Dublin, and all of our tremendous partners in Ireland and sponsors that are helping us to bring this forum to fruition today, as well as the companies that are coming here to share their perspectives and their expertise, I want to welcome you. You know, as we begin to see the light at the end of this very dark tunnel that is COVID-19, I've been thinking a lot about relationships, personal and professional. And, relationships that maybe I took for granted, or relationships that I had always been meaning to establish, but just didn't get around to it. And maybe you're like me and you're thinking that when you finally have the opportunity to reemerge, it will be with more intention. And it's with that context that we bring you all here together today. As many of you know, Montana and Ireland have a long, rich history. But how do we build upon what exists to strengthen it, to make it something that can be transformative, not only for Montana and Ireland, but for the globe? Well, I think we start with where our respective expertise lies. And given that we can't cover everything all at once, and given that we are still in a pandemic, and that underscores the importance of bioscience in a manner that we could not have possibly conveyed to a broader audience a year and a half ago, let's start there. So today what we'll do is that we'll have a Montana contingent that will highlight vaccine development expertise that exists here. And then we'll hear from our Irish counterparts. They'll help us to understand bioscience in Ireland and where their respective expertise lies, where there may be opportunities to partner, whether that's in research and development or supply chain relationships or other. We're certainly not going to solve all of the world's ailments today with our little forum, but we are going to take an intentional step in cultivating this important relationship that we have right now to create something more impactful for our states and for Ireland and for beyond. So with that, I'd like to welcome Daniel Mulhall, Ambassador of Ireland to the United States. Ambassador, we are so pleased to have you here with us today. We would be honored if you would start us off by sharing a few words before we move to our first panel.
Well, thank you very much, Brigitta, and thank you for organizing this virtual trade mission. I think we all yearn for the day when we can stop using the word virtual. It'll be. I think we should decommission that word. I think we should kind of banish it from the language once this pandemic is behind us. But at least we have the option of doing things virtually, which is, I suppose, the only relief we have in this past year when we've been forced to avoid face-to-face activities of the kind that were sort of the norm for us, for people in WTCs all over the world, and for business people and for diplomats. And I always say diplomacy is a face-to-face business, but we've had to do it without the face-to-face activity. And if you look behind me here, you will see a photograph of a familiar building, the White House, built by an Irishman, in fact, James Hoban, who was an Irish architect who came to America in the 1780s and ended up becoming the architect of the White House. But this is a photograph from last year, and it was greened. They greened the fountain. But this year, they went even a lot further because of President Joe Biden, and they greened the entire White House. So before long, there'll be a banner behind me here, which will show the White House in a very bright color green. Because I went down myself last Wednesday. I'd seen photographs on Twitter, and people had sent me photographs of it, but I said, no, I want to go down. I want to see it myself. I want to see a live White House bathed in green as it was there last Wednesday evening. So, and that in a way is a kind of a nice image for the Irish-American relationship over the last number of years and decades, and indeed for the potential for the Montana-Ireland relationship in the years ahead. So here's my story. In a way, Montana is a perfect example. It epitomizes, in a way, the Irish connection with the United States, because In the 19th century, many Irish people made their way to Montana. In fact, I believe that Butte, Montana may well be the city in the United States that has the highest percentage of people of Irish heritage. And that is a reflection of a, a reality that was part of the Irish experience during the second half of the 19th century. And that reality can be summed up in one word: emigration. So emigration from Ireland to the United States became the norm for many Irish people because opportunities at home were limited and people fled in large numbers to the United States. And a significant number of them ended up settling in Montana. And that is why we have this extraordinary Irish community in Montana. Not only that, but one of the first governors of Montana, Thomas Francis Meagher, was actually a native of my hometown, my home city of Waterford. And therefore, I have a special affection for Montana because having many times seen the statue of Thomas Francis Meagher that stands in one of the main streets in Waterford, I'm looking forward to seeing its counterpart in the capital of Montana. So that will give me a huge incentive to want to get across to Montana. I have been there. I actually did go there on holidays a couple of years ago and visited some of your national parks and really had a wonderful time. But I didn't do any business there. I was purely on holidays at that time. But I'm looking forward to going back for an official visit and to meeting all the Irish connections there in Montana and to celebrating this extraordinary connection with Montana that goes back to the days of Thomas Francis Meagher and those miners who came across and settled in Montana and are now the mainstay of the Irish community there. Of course, I'd also be keen to go to the University of Montana to visit one of our great Irish Studies centers at the university. It's and I will actually be doing a virtual event with the University of Montana in a little while, in a few weeks or a few months' time. I can't remember when exactly it is, but I have one planned anyway, when we'll be discussing some aspect of the advent of Irish independence with the University of Montana cooperating in this exercise. So thanks to them for that, and thanks for the work they do there in promoting Irish studies at the University of Montana in Missoula, and I look forward to going there as well at some point. However, let's just take the story forward. 19th century, it's a flood of people across the Atlantic to settle here in the United States, leaving Ireland because economic opportunities in Ireland were limited. In the 20th century, we saw a movement in the other direction because we saw American tourists going to Ireland, and they, in a way, spurred the creation of a tourism industry because, of course, we had to start to up our game in order to provide American tourists with the kind of services and the kind of quality of experience that they wanted, that they expected. And also we had American companies investing in Ireland, which helped transform our economy to the point where today there are 800 or so American companies with headquarters in Ireland, and many of them using Ireland as a base from which to explore and the markets of the European Union, the 450 million people that live in the European Union, and then the other markets outside of Europe where the EU has free trade agreements. So the value to American companies of their presence in Ireland is enormous in allowing them to penetrate those markets in Europe and beyond from a base in Ireland. And just this week, just today, in fact, Intel announced that it was investing another couple of billion, $7 billion in Ireland between 2019 and 2021. They'll have invested $7 billion, and they've announced another 1,500 jobs in their plant in County Kildare near Dublin. So that's the kind of story of the 20th century and into the 21st. But then the other story, which is the one that I suppose we're talking about here today to a large extent, is the story of Irish companies becoming more engaged in the American market. So we now have 800 Irish companies with investments, with a presence here in the United States. Many more, of course, export here, but we've some 800 companies who have a presence in the United States. And between them, they employ 110,000 Americans. And the great thing is, and the thing that's important to know for Montana, is that you might say, oh, well, Irish investment in the United States will all be in Boston, New York, Chicago, San Francisco. No, it's all the country. And let me give you one example from a neighboring state of yours. The local, originally a cooperative from my home area, it was originally called Waterford Foods. It was a local cooperative, and it's grown exponentially over the last number of decades. And it's now called Glanbia. And they are now major employers in your neighboring state of Idaho. So it proves that you don't have to be New York and Boston and Chicago to attract investment from Ireland. In fact, I think Irish companies are looking for opportunities to do business outside of those centers, because they recognize there may be some advantages to being in places where maybe the cost structures are not as forbidding, as formidable as they would be in some of the other places that we've just mentioned. So that is the reason why I think this gathering today of Montana companies and Irish companies is so important, because it opens up a vista for Irish companies to actually connect with counterparts in Montana, to perhaps establish a presence in Montana, to build their businesses from Montana, and to service maybe the American market from a location in Montana. Why not? Now, when I first started in the Foreign Service 40 years ago, if I had given any encouragement to an Irish company to establish themselves outside of Ireland and to actually create jobs outside of Ireland, I would have been called home and probably dismissed from the service. But that's all changed, because Enterprise Ireland, our economic promotion agency, now realizes, as does the Irish government, that no Irish company can thrive if it only has an operation in Ireland. Just as American companies would never be global leaders if they only were operating in America. You need to have an international presence. You need to be an international company. And you need to have bases in different parts of the world if you're going to penetrate those markets. And that's why Irish companies are looking to come to America. And that's why I think last year, if I'm not mistaken, the figures I was given recently were that some 80 companies had come into America for the first time, Irish companies, or were expanding their presence here. And given that last year wasn't the easiest of years to be doing business anywhere in the world, when travel was virtually impossible, the travel ban still applies, and it's very difficult to get waivers from that travel ban. So the fact that such an expansion occurred last year in the Irish presence in the US economy tells me that this is a seriously important opportunity for Irish businesses. And that's why I'm so glad that we have Irish companies taking part in today's event, who may be able to find ways of expanding their businesses internationally in America, in Montana, by establishing connections with Montana-based companies. So I want to wish all of those taking part in today's event all the very best. This is a virtual room, but as an ambassador, I do rooms, right? I have a big room downstairs, right? And in a normal world, 2-3 times a week, I would have a group of people in that room. And the idea behind that is not because I like a full room, I like saying hello to people. It's because when you fill a room with people, things happen. And the hope that we have as diplomats is that good things happen when we bring people into our embassy rooms for a reception or a function or whatever, that people meet each other and something sparks and some magic occurs and things take off from there. And I love to hear stories of people who tell me, oh, I did a good bit of business because I met somebody at your residence a year ago or whatever. So this is not my residence, but let's say it is. Let's pretend this virtual room is at the Irish Embassy in Washington, D.C. And I've invited all these people from Montana and Ireland to come and elsewhere in the United States to come and sup with me. I'm afraid it'll have to be a virtual sup, but one of these days we'll rectify that. The idea is that in this virtual room, as in the embassy downstairs, as in our reception downstairs, people should meet and good things should happen. So I wish everyone here all the best, and I hope that good things will happen out of this gathering and that we will see a further growth in the extraordinary connection, historical connection between Montana and Ireland, and we can take that forward into the future with collaborations that benefit both of us. In other words, in the 19th century, it was all one way across the Atlantic to here. In the 20th century, it was mainly one way across the Atlantic to Ireland. And hopefully the 21st century will see a lot more two-way traffic of trade, investment, and know-how between our two countries and between Ireland and the great state of Montana. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. We really appreciate that. And I think you're spot on when you made a point about particularly knowledge-based industries sort of reevaluating where they're siting. It may not make sense to be in those large cities as it used to. And in fact, they may find that in places like Montana, they are able to secure loyal talent, right? And given our history, we certainly hope to see more of a look from Irish firms here. But and thanks again for inviting us to your virtual room.
I'll hand the room back to you now, I think, Brigitte.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. All right. So next up, we will have our Montana panel that will be led by Rob Goodwin, who's the CEO of Bibliome Therapeutics. And Rob, I think, will introduce the other members of his panel. And then if anyone is interested, all bios are posted on our website at mwtc.org. I will hand it over to you, Rob. You've got about 35 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Happy to talk about business in Montana and what Montana companies are doing to step up and address some of the challenges that COVID has presented us. It's been an incredible year for technology companies. I think we all recognize how much has happened in so short a time period. I think a lot of things are going to change, and the impact will be felt for a long time. One of the things I'm proud about Montana is that Montana leads the country in the percentage of the population that starts businesses and owns businesses. We're very entrepreneurial. I've been working to grow drug development businesses in Montana for more than the last 20 years. And some of the panelists that are joining me today are doing the same thing, and they've really stepped up, and they've all done an incredible amount to try to combat and meet the challenges that COVID has presented us, but they all have businesses that were set up to do other things as well. And so part of this story is a shift and an adjustment to address the challenges of the pandemic. So first, I'd like to introduce Dr. Kendall Ryder. He's joining us from Inimmune. He's based in Missoula. We also have Dr. Chris Booth from Fire Diagnostics in Missoula, and Dr. Seth Liederman, who will speak about his experience at Tonix, who is doing some really impressive planning to expand in Montana. And I think that's a theme that we're going to be seeing more and more of soon. So Kendall Ryder has a lot of experience in development and commercial supply of immunomodulating compounds, so agonists and antagonists of toll-like receptors. And as many of us know, these are things that make vaccines work better, but they're also can be drugs on their own and very effective compounds. And Inimmune is a company that was founded to develop this new technology around toll-like receptor agonists and antagonists. So Kendall, I'll hand it over to you, and you can tell us more about what's going on at Inimmune. And you're on mute.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. Can everybody hear me okay? Sometimes my computer doesn't like to use my microphone. So yeah, thanks for the introduction. Thanks for allowing me to be a part of this little talk and talk about Inimmune. We're basically a group of, I guess, 28 people now. We started out the company in 2016 after we were laid off from GSK. We have a long history of working with immunomodulators, vaccine adjuvants, and basically the reason we stayed in Montana was because we love working in Montana. We love living in Montana, and we were offered an opportunity to move our research group to Maryland and still work for GSK, and we decided to go a different route. We had a contract at the time with the NIH that we were able to transfer to the University of Montana. So most of us, most of the senior leadership at this point still hold joint appointments with the University of Montana. So we run basic research, discovery research labs at the University of Montana. So it'll be great to see the ambassador, and if he ever makes it to the university, we'd be glad to host him there also. In total, we employ about 64 people between Inimmune and the university. In the past 5 years since we started Inimmune and joined the university, we brought in over $100 million in grants and contracts. And obviously we're moving a lot of things toward the clinic. We're thinking about expanding a lot of different aspects of our work. Currently, we're doing a lot of GMP synthesis. We're preparing to do a lot of GMP synthesis, moving into clinical trials. A lot of that stuff has to be outsourced because we don't have GMP facilities, but we would love to build those in Montana or anywhere else that benefits us, I guess, financially. There's a lot of things to evaluate when you're growing a company extremely quickly. And I guess, what else can I tell you? What else do you want to know about Inimmune?
Well, I think, Kendall, one question that comes to my mind is that, none of us were working on COVID or coronaviruses probably, if we turn the clock back a year. So Inimmune had been building a business looking at immunomodulators and vaccine adjuvants. What was it that caused Inimmune to say, COVID's here, it's a big challenge, we need to pivot and put resources into COVID-related programs at the expense of maybe other things that you had planned to do?
Sure, yeah, definitely. Some of our programs definitely took a back seat. We're very fortunate in that we have a very close relationship with the NIH, and they realized very early on that one of the potential biggest impacts of combating this pandemic was having a good vaccine. And I don't think anybody anticipated that the RNA vaccines would be so successful at really controlling infection. And we were awarded a grant to evaluate all of the existing commercial vaccines with the COVID spike protein. That was a collaboration with Sloan Kettering Institute out of New York. They were making the spike protein that's found on the surface of COVID. They transferred that technology to us. Our core facility at the University of Montana was able to stay open and produce the protein. And our group was able to keep working. We were not shut down at all on the university side or on the Inimmune side in order to conduct this research to begin production of GMP vaccine adjuvants, just in case they were needed. We were evaluating a total of, I think, 8 different adjuvants, either alone or in combination in mouse models with the spike protein. So, we were kind of fortunate in that, we were, in a position to, potentially affect the outcome of this pandemic if other vaccines needed a good adjuvant, or if we needed different technologies. We were kind of right there lurking in the background, which was actually pretty exciting. But also at the same time, we're an immunology group, so we understand the virology of the pandemic. And we implemented, we don't have a lot of space for all of our employees. We allowed them to work different shifts on the weekends. to limit the person-to-person exposure, implemented a mask policy, cleaning procedures, and throughout the pandemic, we've had, I think, 6 people that contracted the virus from outside sources, either family members or community, but there has been no workplace spread because of those measures. So I don't care what you hear anywhere else, masks work.
Yeah, that's great. I agree. You speak about GMP manufacturing, which is good manufacturing practices. It's a regulated form of manufacturing that the FDA oversees in the United States. Is that a big challenge for a small company to be able to support manufacturing under that regulated environment?
It is. The choice of a contract manufacturer is critical, especially for our complex molecules. We have some very complex syntheses. Right now we're working with, I think, 5 different contractors in order to make the starting materials at scale, and evaluate the GMP process, conduct the GMP synthesis of the adjuvants themselves. And then there's other suppliers that will be needed to do the formulations and the fill finish of a drug product. And then we have another contractor that's going to do the clinical studies and support that effort. So it is pretty tricky. And I keep saying one of the best things that ever happened in Montana was the laying of the fiber optic cable that brought in high-speed internet. Without that, we wouldn't be able to do this work. But yeah, it is difficult. It's challenging. I think for some of our products, it would be much better to build a site and manufacture them here. But until we have a commercial product, that's just not feasible.
Well, maybe we can all work on increasing infrastructure in the state. I know that in my past experience, just the manufacturing side of a vaccine can take years to validate a process. And what we've just seen in the last year, to have something go from an idea to a vaccine in a vial that's going into somebody's arm is absolutely incredible and unprecedented. So thanks so much for everything that you guys are doing at Immune. I think that it's much needed at this time. So I'm going to shift now to Dr. Chris Booth at Fire Diagnostics. Fire Diagnostics is obviously a diagnostic company, but they're based on looking at PCR diagnostics. And Chris, I'm sure if you turn the clock back a year, you would have had to do a lot of hand waving in order to explain to somebody what a PCR diagnostic test is. Now, of course, everyone has been exposed to different kinds of diagnostic tests and different kinds of vaccines and different brands of diagnostic tests. And it's just been incredible how the awareness has changed. Chris is coming to us from Fire in Missoula, but he has a long academic background in pharmacology, molecular biology, and biochemistry. And this is an example of a newer startup that maybe you can help us understand. Did you start up to do diagnostic tests and pivot to COVID, or did you have coronaviruses in mind when you first started? Maybe you can tell us a little bit about Fire. And you're still on mute.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, no, we definitely did not start specifically looking at coronaviruses. Pathogen detection really wasn't even a primary focus for us. We founded our company focused on innovating and developing tests that utilize what we like to call next generation biomarkers for the early detection and continued monitoring of various diseases in human health and the agricultural industry. So these new biomarkers are intended to go beyond your DNA and your genome, and instead precisely looking for the actual regulators and players that are involved in the mechanisms of the disease, which can be various types of RNA, such as microRNAs, circular RNAs, long non-coding RNAs, all sorts of there's a whole there's a whole transcriptome out there that is quite large that we're trying to decipher. And they're also, these targets can be a little difficult to reliably detect, and they're, PCR is used, but there are limitations. And so we also have research and development efforts focused on innovating and developing new detection technologies for these new biomarkers. So that's what we were focused on, and trying to establish a new strategy and approach for the early detection and monitoring of disease, and specifically a big focus on neurological disorders. And COVID happened, and early 2020, I think there were 4 or 5 of us, and we're backed by Two Bear Capital, which is a VC. We had some seed funding, but for a business, it was a big risk and decision for us to consider. Is there anything that we can do? I actually remember before we got into it that we were spitballing the idea of like taking a week off of our research efforts and like simulating test development. Like, what would we do? Like designing the primers and trying to apply one of the detection tools that we were developing to COVID. And we started getting phone calls, and there was a huge support from Two Bear Capital that was like, you guys got to do something. So we were like, okay. We talked as a team, and we were like, this is a big decision, and are we going to do this? And we said yes, and we ran. And it's been about a year, almost exactly, and we started repurposing one of the detection tools that we were working on for COVID. And the idea was an isothermal amplification technology that ran in 30 minutes, trying to utilize different resources and materials that were outside of the pipeline that was being used for PCR. We actually did develop a test, but then the FDA stopped approving laboratory developed tests, and we didn't want to manufacture and distribute it for all sorts of complicated reasons, small company. And we also, sorry, my dogs are in the background. We also started to realize that the actual infrastructure in Montana really wasn't necessarily at a place to support a new test like this. And so we actually found this new problem of there just needs to be a general increase in testing capabilities, period. And so we built a clinical diagnostic lab. In the process, we got all the certifications and everything in place, and built the first automation-based high throughput testing facility in the state, and are the only private company in the state of Montana that's contracted with the state to be able to do tests. And that's what we're doing right now. So we've grown to 17 people in the past year. We've taken over the basement of our building and are continuing to rapidly grow. So that's kind of how we got into this, a long story, but it definitely was not our intention.
Well, it's a great story, and I think it speaks to the timelines that have really changed. I mean, if you had said a year ago that you were going to plan to build out a commercial clinical testing laboratory, you probably would have spent a year on planning, and you would have raised the money, and you would have found the space, and you would have built out the space, and it would have taken a couple of years in order to get that up and running. And what you guys were able to do was quickly get up and running and start testing and addressing a shortcoming that we have in the state, but also, I presume, looking at abilities to serve communities outside of Montana as well. So it's just been incredible. I can't believe it every time I think about it. What do you think is next for FHIR? Are you planning on after COVID, or, I mean, how do you think about COVID as a wave of diagnostic testing needs that are here now but might decrease in the future? Or maybe share with us how you think about that from a business planning perspective.
Absolutely. So there is life after COVID, especially we already are ramping up all of our other research projects. We have multiple federal grants supporting a couple biomarker discovery projects that, we're really excited to get back up and running. This opportunity also, kind of like you said, it kind of pushed us into building infrastructure that it would have taken us years, and we sped up. So now we're kind of in a place that we didn't expect to be in at this point in time in our company's development, and it actually has opened up a lot of opportunity for us by having a clinical diagnostic lab. It's changed how we're going to be approaching our biomarker discovery projects because we have an alternative way of deploying them now. It's also opened the door to us supporting pathogen detection, whether it be in human health, whether it be COVID or just universal PCR tests for various microbes, or in the agricultural industry. There's a huge need for being able to do this work, and now we have the infrastructure. So it's kind of actually put us in a really good situation to be able to not only bolster and support our actual initial objectives that we had as a company, but also opening doors for new opportunities that we were probably not going to at least initially explore. So, and we want to be a part of providing a regional solution to various types of diagnostic testing in the state, not just our tests, but deploying other tests. A lot of testing needs are actually outsourced, and they're sent outside of the state. Now we have the ability to start potentially performing genetic screening in the state, for the state of Montana, or for oncology or various applications. And we also are interested in, being prepared for whatever is to come next. It could be not even something like COVID. It could be a food outbreak or anything like that. And now the state has additional infrastructure to be able to help support it. And so that's kind of how we see life after COVID.
Well, it's a great story, and you guys have done a terrific job. And I know that you've definitely filled a niche in the state where a lot of things had to happen quickly. So thanks for doing that. And we're really looking forward to seeing how you continue to grow and what comes next for FHIR. I'm going to shift now to Seth Lederman, who joins us from Tonix Pharmaceuticals. And Seth is a physician and a scientist and has had a long career in academia at Columbia. Tonix is a really interesting company because they're a small pharmaceutical company that's working both in vaccines and also diagnostics, or vaccines and therapeutics, excuse me. And I know that, Seth, you've announced some plans recently to expand into Montana. Would love to hear more about what's happening at Tonix and what you're doing as a company, and also what you're doing to help address challenges in the COVID space.
Well, thank you very much, Rob, for having me on, and thanks to the organizers. First, I want to say that we are among the companies who have an office in Dublin, and our manufacturing operations are managed by our professional team in Dublin. So before the pandemic, I was going to Dublin at least quarterly, but that's obviously been interrupted. So, but more to your point, Tonix is a NASDAQ company. We are based in New Jersey, and we have been working for years, for 8 years, on a vaccine platform that was designed to help in pandemic preparedness. So this vaccine took on great importance when the COVID-2 virus was discovered and announced in January. So we jumped on the problem and have now engineered our vaccine platform to express the spike protein. And we have taken it through some non-human primate studies and have compelling evidence for protection from COVID. We just announced data about a week ago, and for inducing a strong immune response. Our vaccine platform is based on the oldest platform in the field of vaccines because it's based on Edward Jenner's vaccine. Edward Jenner developed the first vaccine for smallpox. He first used it in 1798. And it is the most successful vaccine ever developed because it is the only vaccine to have eradicated the disease it was designed to protect against, and that's smallpox. So over the years, the smallpox vaccine has evolved in culture most recently, but before that it was grown on the sides of cows. And before that it was transmitted lovingly for 100 years, arm to arm, human to human. For 150 of its years as a vaccine, it was propagated before scientists knew what a virus was. So there's quite a lot of history to vaccinia, which is what Edward Jenner called it, but we call the platform horsepox. And we believe that the horsepox that we're working with is closer in molecular terms to what Edward Jenner used than to the modern vaccinias. We have evidence that it is less virulent. So we think that it is an ideal platform for a COVID vaccine and for other vaccines. Now, obviously there are 3 EUA vaccines approved, and I've gotten one. I'm halfway through Pfizer, so I urge everyone, if wait your turn, but the moment your turn comes up, please get vaccinated. It's not just for you, it's for everyone. But we don't think that the vaccine problem is solved. There's a big problem about durability. We really don't know how long the vaccine protection from these 3 EUA vaccines will last. And one of the strengths of our system, which is based on a live replicating viral vaccine, is historically provides years and decades of protection. So while we may or may not have our vaccine out there for the pandemic, there is going to be a post-pandemic COVID problem. I and many other people believe that COVID is going to become endemic after the pandemic is over. And ultimately, although first we will test it on adults, ultimately we would expect to test it on children. We expect that childhood vaccination to COVID will become the norm in the same way that MMR, for example, measles, mumps, rubella, is a childhood vaccine, 3 live viral vaccines to protect against those conditions. So this leads into what we're doing in Montana. We found that it was very hard to contract out services in 2020, particularly hard if you were working in the area of a COVID vaccine. So we really realized that we needed, it sounds reminiscent of Chris's description of what they discovered, that we needed to get our own bricks and mortar, our own infrastructure to continue to develop our current vaccine, but also plan for future pandemics, what I think the president and the policymakers call pandemic preparedness. So we have purchased a greenfield site in Hamilton, Montana, and we are beginning slowly. I understand there are only 2 construction seasons in Montana. So we hope to get, some things done this year, but really start in earnest next year. And we think that Hamilton is really an ideal place. Obviously, Kendall and his team came from the Corixa BB site in now GSK site in Hamilton. So he has roots there, and that's a wonderful site that makes 2 very important adjuvants that support 2 very important vaccines, Cervarix and Shingrix. So, I mean, already just with the Glaxo facility, a leading vaccine company, manufacturer in the world. And on the other side of the highway, the road down from us, is the Rocky Mountain National Labs, which is a world-renowned research facility run by the National Institutes of Health. So we have been welcomed by the Hamilton community. We are excited to be part of the Hamilton community. I understand that the Hamilton community may stretch north up to Missoula. So we look forward to interacting with Kendall and his team. But It's a very exciting time for vaccine developers, and it's an exciting time to be in Montana. Hopefully, the pandemic will pass and we'll be, as I said, working on a post-pandemic vaccine. But I think that it's a little bit early for people to get too optimistic. So I think everyone should please stay cool, get vaccinated. Let's see what happens in the next 3 months. But we are, whether we are involved in the pandemic issue or whether it's post-pandemic, we're excited to be part of the Montana bioscience community.
That sounds great. Well, welcome to Montana to you, and thanks for putting resources into the state. I think that when you look at manufacturing capacity for vaccines, if you turn the clock back a year or two, it was already insufficient to do the kind of work that needed to be done. And what the pandemic has done is exacerbated some of the shortages in manufacturing capacity, because suddenly, we've had 180 vaccines in development. Obviously, those don't all go through to approval, but to get into human clinical trials, you do need to manufacture in a regulated environment. And that regulated environment, there are only a small handful of places that can do that kind of manufacturing. And globally, there's a shortage in capacity to manufacture. I'm not even talking about Montana or the United States. It's a global problem. So I think more infrastructure being dedicated to being able to manufacture new things that can be tested in people and can rise to the occasion to meet the challenges with the pandemic are really important. We're just about at the end of this section of the panel. Maybe I would just ask each of you to consider ways in which you might want to grow into Ireland in the future. And if there's a possibility to do business with Ireland, with any of your companies, or to consider manufacturing in Ireland, or looking at relationships to sell products into the EU or the UK through Ireland. I think that would help us meet the mission of this big virtual room that we're in today, and look forward to hearing more from the Irish side of the innovation space. And Brigitte, if I could hand it back to you, maybe we can transition into the second part of the panel.
Sounds good. Thanks, Rob. Thanks to all of our panelists there. Rob, I appreciate you helping to give us a taste of the Montana bioscience landscape. I know that was a tall order in a short period of time. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm going to try to drop in isothermal amplification technology at another meeting I have today to see how that goes. So next, we are going to be joined by our Ireland panel, and leading that panel is Jenny Lynch, who is the Senior Vice President of Life Sciences for Enterprise Ireland. And before I go over to Jenny, I see that we do have one question in the Q&A, and I just want to let you know, Rob, that we'll handle those at the end of this session after this panel, okay? Go ahead, Jenny.
Hi, everyone. Brigitte, everyone can hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. Hi, everyone. My panelists today, as well as the audience, I hope everyone is well and having a great week. Hello from the Irish side of the panel. As Brigitte said, my name is Jenny Lynch. I am the Senior Vice President for Enterprise for Life Sciences at Enterprise Ireland out in Boston. So I'm joining you from Massachusetts today, albeit my home office, not the actual office, which is a very COVID issue we're all dealing with at the moment. So for those that are not aware of Enterprise Ireland, I'll do a quick 30 seconds on the organization before I briefly introduce the panelists today. So Enterprise Ireland, we are the innovation arm of the Irish government. So we're a government organisation responsible for the development and growth of Irish enterprises in world markets. So we work in partnership with Irish companies to help them start, grow, innovate, and then export into global markets. Some quick facts about Enterprise Ireland. We are the largest VC in the world. So we invest a lot into fostering growth with our Irish companies. Ambassador Mahal mentioned some of the new locations for Irish companies in the US a little earlier. There's actually been 125 new locations for Irish enterprise companies in the US in the past 2 years. Ireland, while we may be a small country, we are 9th in terms of FDI into the US, which accounts for about $225.5 billion into the US economy. So, you know, no big deal, just top 10 FDI into the US. Bringing it back a little bit to COVID and what we've all been dealing with in the past 12 months, Ireland was actually recognized as being in the top 5 global exporters for COVID-19 solutions, pretty much off the bat as soon as the pandemic hit. And overall, from a global ranking perspective, Ireland is 6th in terms of countries responding to the pandemic in terms of innovation. So yeah, we're a very active little island from that perspective. Before I do hand over to the panelists, Brigitte and the team at Montana, I just want to say thanks so much for having us today. It's super to be joining you and the representatives from Montana. I was actually very pleasantly surprised to read about the Irish American heritage from a Montana standpoint, and to actually find out that Montana was historically known as the 33rd county of Ireland. So we share some great Irish American roots there. How fantastic. So that's Enterprise Ireland, and that's a little about myself. I'm going to hand over to the panelists now, and I'll ask each of them just to very briefly introduce themselves before we kick into some questions about what's happening in Ireland from a biotech and a life science perspective. So first up will be the Consul General, Robert O'Driscoll in San Francisco. Robert, do you want to maybe give a quick overview?
Thanks, Jenny. So Robert O'Driscoll, I'm Ireland's Consul General here to the Pacific Northwest, based in San Francisco. I am in my office today. We are in going into the orange tier here, the second lowest tier of restrictions in San Francisco, which is very exciting. But always a pleasure to join the good people of Montana, where I've had the pleasure of visiting and intend to do so as soon as it is feasible to get back.
Thanks, Robert. Wow, I'm envious that you're in the office. Matthew Moran, who's the Director of Biopharmachem Ireland. Matthew, do you want to say hello?
Yeah, hi Jenny. My name is Matt Moran and I'm Director of Biopharmachem Ireland. We represent biopharmaceutical and chemical manufacturing in Ireland. We're part of IBEC, which is the main employer organisation in the country. I'm delighted to be here. And as you know, Ireland's a very important hub for the industry. A lot of US-based companies obviously are located here too.
Perfect, thank you, Matt. Paul O'Connell from Titan Solutions. Paul, you're the director there at Titan. Do you want to maybe give us a brief overview of yourself and the company?
Sure. Hello, Jenny. Hello, everybody. Yeah, it's nice to be participating on the call. I'm actually calling in from the west of Ireland, so from Shannon. And yeah, so Titan Solutions is a company that's 10 years old this year. And like the ambassador referred to earlier, we're actually one of those companies that last year took the plunge and decided to invest and put boots on the ground in the US. So very proud of that. But we are involved in supply chain solutions and deploying supply chain solutions for companies that I guess we're all having the privilege of meeting around the virtual room today. So I'm going to talk a little bit later in terms of supply chain solutions and how a company like Titan supports companies in deploying supply chain solutions in that space.
Perfect. Thank you, Paul. We're excited for that a little bit later. And last but certainly not least, Kieran Daly, founder and CTO of Health Beacon. Hi, Kieran.
Hey, Jenny, thanks to the team for having us on today. So my name is Kieran Daly. I'm the CTO and co-founder at Health Beacon, broadly in the broad church of digital health. And more specifically, we're focused on medication adherence technologies for those that take injectable medication, particularly injectable medication in the home.
Perfect. Thanks, Kieran, so much. So I'm going to dive right in with some questions for the panel. And Robert, I'm going to turn to you first. So as you know, and has been mentioned throughout the call today, collaboration has never been more important as we all try and emerge from COVID-19, from the global pandemic. For Ireland and the US, I think the importance of transatlantic partnership have never been more significant. With that in mind, I wanted to maybe ask if you could expand upon the relationship between Ireland and the US, given your position and your outlook on what that really means for Irish American business in the Western US.
Thanks so much, Jenny, and delighted to join this august panel here today. And a big thank you to World Trade Center in Montana, who of course know very well, Brigitte and the colleagues back in World Trade Center Dublin as well for their help in putting this together. So, I mean, I think from my perspective and perspective of the consulate here, I mean, very much look back to this idea that we've had since the foundation of the state of Ireland as a bridge between Europe and the US. This was kind of our foundational economic policy in terms of international trade and investment, was to make that connection between the two continents. And it's fair to say that we've been incredibly successful in that. I think the figures have already been said today, so I'm not going to repeat them today again. But you know, in Ireland, for example, we have about 180,000 people working in about 800 US companies, and the figures, as you said, are commensurate are similar in the US, which is enormous considering we are 1/50th the size population-wise of the United States.
Yeah.
And I think the US role has a huge transformational impact on our economy, and particularly in life sciences, where now we have, you know, 9 of the top 10 of the world's top pharma companies, the third largest exporter of pharma in the world, and it's an enormous trading relationship, and it's built an enormous economic innovation system within Ireland. And a lot of our indigenous companies who come from that system, they really are engaging with world-class levels of pharma, which prepares them well for coming over and succeeding in the United States. I think one part where we're particularly proud in Ireland, and where the links are redeveloping and I think have potential to grow even more, is on the research agenda. SFI, the Science Foundation Ireland, the research agency in Ireland, have about 450 academic collaborations in the US, 250 industry collaborations in the US.
Oh, Robert, I think you may have muted yourself inadvertently there.
There we go. Sorry.
Sorry. Go ahead.
That's it. And just one of the collaborations just last week was announced was Applied Materials and the SSPC Research Center, which is going to be around addressing a collaboration addressing key challenges in the pharmaceutical industry. So this is happening in real time. These connections are forming in real time. I think from an Irish perspective, we don't take it for granted. We're investing in that relationship. So two things I maybe say on that are, one, you know, we are opening new offices in places that we haven't had office before. From our economic agency perspective, we just opened 2 offices in Seattle in the Pacific Northwest, and those offices are facilitating opening of Irish companies accessing those markets. I know the Seattle Enterprise Ireland office has supported 5 Irish companies to open in the Washington State region over the last number of months, and that really, we hope, is going to continue. We've opened a new consulate in California, which means that in Southern California, which means that I am liberated to go and see the rest of the Pacific Northwest. I intend to spend definitely more time in Montana, and I think also these types of engagements are a really good way, because those, you know, I always say diplomacy is a contact sport. So you need to be able to meet people, to engage with them, to develop those connections, and do more of this type of work. I think is really, really important. We're investing time in that. The final thing I'd say in that is just on Ireland is that, you know, we very much see ourselves as a trusted partner for the United States. I think it's a really important part of it. You know, Irish companies and US companies who scale in Ireland, you know, we're very much a very strong advocate for stronger supply chains, making sure that the international trading environment works really, really well, because we are the most globalized economy in the world, and we know that, you know, it's good for us and it's good for the world for those supply chains to be strong, for them to be open, and for them to be resilient. So we're investing in that, and we have invested in that over the last while. Just the very last thing I'd say is that when I think of the Ireland-Montana or Ireland-US relationship, it's very much in an EU context, and very encouraged by the publication of the Commission of their new EU-US agenda for global change, which was released just before Christmas. That really flags out a range of different areas for the EU, the European Union, and the US to collaborate and to drive the global agenda. And it's really, really important because a third of global GDP is between Europe and the US, half of global personal consumption, 60% of all inward and outward investment. So when Europe and the US collaborate and drive change, they can achieve great things. And at the forefront of that, in the context of this conversation today, is life sciences. It's about dealing with the pandemic. It's about the range of areas around that. And then it's also about preparing for future global health challenges. And I really hope, as we develop that EU-US relationship with the new administration in the US, that there's opportunities then for Irish companies and US companies to collaborate and to scale. And that's what I'd be keeping my eye on if I was working in that sector.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Robert. I mean, certainly managed to give us a very succinct but incredibly thorough overview as to what's happening from an Irish perspective there. I think I'm going to touch a little bit on the global commercialization piece that you mentioned and that focus on supply chain, because I think, as you've managed to illustrate, the appetite for innovation is voracious, I think, on both sides of the Atlantic. And wherever we can look to leverage that through our supply chain and through collaboration and partnership, we certainly want to do so. So with that in mind, Paul, I might turn to you. As Robert mentioned, Ireland is home to 9 out of the top 10 world's largest pharmaceutical as well as medtech companies. So we are home to a lot of really significant multinational corporations. Can yourself and the team, at Titan shed some light on what we can expect moving forward from a supply chain standpoint, and maybe how supply chain has changed as a result of the pandemic in the last 12 months or so?
Yeah, absolutely, Jenny, and thanks for the intro. I think from a Titan Solutions perspective, because we live and breathe this on a daily basis, I mean, we've seen firsthand in terms of, I think the common theme in today's contributions has really been around the pandemic and the impact it has had on companies, businesses, and supply chain is no different. If you look at supply chain and the impact of COVID-19, I mean, it's been pretty impactful in terms of what it's done. I think what it's done is it's exposed some weaknesses and flaws, particularly in some of the supply chains that have evolved over the years in terms of their complexity. And part of what we're looking to unravel and sort of help companies with really is how can we introduce digital supply chain technology that becomes a competitive edge for companies in that space. And really that becomes this transformational change agent to allow companies actually pivot and become more agile in their supply chains. I think if I maybe summarize just in terms of 2 particular areas, one is how that sort of applies to the whole globalization and offshoring. Again, I think companies are now looking to see how over the years their supply chains have become sort of complex. There's flaws contained within it. And as a result, it's increasing sort of working capital and costs within their business. So deploying digital supply chain tools that maybe looks at their inventory as an example. And again, inventory is a great example where within the pandemic, many companies have seen their inventories either too much or too little, but certainly out of whack in terms of the norm of what inventories have been for them. So they're now looking to deploy pretty sophisticated digital platforms that will support those companies in terms of what's the optimum level of inventory within their businesses. And what does that look like in the new world that is, hopefully, as we've sort of said today, the sort of post-COVID. So that's an example of a digital supply chain tool that's being deployed. Similarly, if you look at consumer and consumer demand in life science, it's no different. Is becoming increasingly demanding, right? So again, companies need to be closer to their customers. So again, they're looking at their networks, how they can revisit their networks, be closer to the consumer. And again, deploying digital supply chain tools to actually look at that. So modeling what was there previously, route to market, speed to market, and then modeling sort of post that scenario in terms of actually bringing those companies closer to their customers. So again, 2 distinct tools that can be deployed within that digital supply world. I think if you look at it on a day-to-day transactional basis, many companies are now looking at visibility within their supply chain. And again, this goes back to consumer demands. Gartner did a study recently where by 2023, 50% of companies that are producing products will actually deploy visibility tools to support their business. So what that means in real terms is, if you look at a platform where you can bring all of your multiple carriers in under one single platform and manage it digitally, and from a technology standpoint, it creates massive synergies within your business and the opportunity to actually take cost out. It gives visibility, it connects your systems, and it just creates a whole agility within the entire supply chain. Data, and we all hear in terms of data and how best to use data, again, is coming to the fore in terms of data analytics. And again, companies are now looking at data in terms of pulling from their warehouse management systems, their ERP systems, their transport management systems, and how they can actually see all of this data in one single customizable platform. So what's selling, what's not, what's moving, what's not, what's picked up, what's delivered, where are the exceptions, all of that data being available in one dashboard is now sort of crucial. If I apply this to how a company like Titan Solutions is deploying this within the life science space, again, maybe picking up on Dr. Chris Booth and fire diagnostics. I mean, this is an area in which Titan Solution plays, and we've deployed many of these tools within that space. So our transport management system, where we have a network of carriers, we build the kits on behalf of companies like fire diagnostics, and we ship those globally through our transport management system, using our carrier of networks, creating the visibility, giving the data analytics, and again, really looking to how we can bring about continuous improvement on that. And one example of that is through borderless trade. So again, if we ship a diagnostic test kit out to a clinic, and it's a blood sample, we've got to get that back to the lab pretty quickly. So again, we've created a process whereby we can expedite through customs and make it very easy for the clinic to actually, all they've got to do is make a phone call to arrange for the delivery of that kit and get it back to the lab. So these are ways in which the digital supply chain is having a very positive impact on companies in the life science space.
Thank you so much, Paul. You know, I think you've touched upon a lot of key trends that we're seeing on both sides of the Atlantic. You know, consolidation of supply chains as a result of the disruption that took place following the pandemic. You know, an increased demand for transparency around different steps in the supply chain, and digitization is really, you know, the name of the game pertaining to that level of transparency. So I certainly think that, you know, the digitization trend is one that will stick around following the post-pandemic world that we hopefully will be coming into soon enough. But very interesting, Paul, with regards to some of the points that you made there. Bringing it back to Ireland for just a moment, and Matt, I might turn to yourself now, because Biopharmachem had highlighted the advantages of digitization as far back as 2018. So yourself and the team at Biopharmachem, you really had your finger on the pulse of what was going to emerge within this industry well before the pandemic hit. So with that in mind, what would your own thoughts be on where Irish companies should focus their innovation and their efforts around innovation within this space to forge new partnerships moving forward? Perhaps new partnerships in the US even. What would your thoughts on that be?
Sure. I mean, if you're talking digitization, it's two broad thematics for us. First one is manufacturing, and we have an active lighthouse project ongoing at the moment in the area of what we call Factory 5.0, which is traditional Factory 4.0 with sustainability added onto it. That's where the 5 comes from.
I'm only familiar with 4.0. I didn't even know there was a 5.0. So, okay.
So what we're doing is we're focusing on our existing manufacturing base, starting out with our small molecule API manufacturers. And we're looking to bring those companies through into what we would call a digital space. So this means deploying advanced digital technologies in the manufacturing world So that manifests itself through the various, I suppose, management schemes such as MES, ERPs, SAP mentioned already, which would be traditional in companies, and then moving to, I suppose, a paperless system, and also trying to apply advanced process analytical technology and bring the industry into the 21st century. We're working closely with obviously with yourselves and with the IDA, but also with a number of technology companies to see can we bring these companies forward. So the approach we're taking at the moment is to build a roadmap for the companies, which we're doing at the moment, working with some local companies to assess them and to see what their readiness levels are. And we find there's variation within the industry, but as you know, there's a number of leading US-based multinationals who have manufacturing operations in Ireland. So we have a very strong GMP-based manufacturing sector, as most people probably know. And we also have an evolving CMO or contract manufacturing sector as well. So we're using them to look, can we ultimately, I suppose, come up with the ability to supply manufacturing and services virtually from Ireland to the rest of the globe. So that's an interesting area for us. Working closely with J&J, MSD, Lilly, companies such as those to achieve that. We also are looking at digitization of supply chain as well. And there we're concentrating on cell and gene therapy or advanced therapeutics. And we're looking at the possibility of the control tower concept being located in Ireland. We're working quite closely with EY in that regard, with a number of the main pharmaceutical companies. A number of them also have large global business service centers in Ireland, as well as manufacturing centers. So companies like Pfizer, Lilly, Novartis locate a lot of services into Ireland. So by using that infrastructure, we see quite an opportunity to look at Ireland, possibly from a control tower perspective, with its geographical locating control towers between the US and also continental Europe, or even further afield in Asia. So a lot happening. Very interested, obviously, in working with the US in that regard, given it's a US-based industry. Biopharmachem Ireland, we're part of the ICBA, which is the International Council for Biotech Associations, which is actually managed by Bio out of Washington. So we have a lot of working relationships with our sister organizations on the other side of the Atlantic. So delighted to be here. And
Go ahead, Matt. I was just going to comment on, Biopharmachem seems to be incredibly well connected, within the US, and has some strong ties here. I was aware of the BioLink out of Washington, but absolutely, it seems that the roots go much deeper than that.
They do, yeah. And both ways. Obviously, we welcome companies to come to Ireland, but also we're very interested in seeking collaborations within the US. So Montana seems very interesting and very exciting, and the presentations were excellent. And I learned that Tonics are located, and didn't know they were located in Dublin. So very interested in them making contact with us afterwards. We'd be very happy to help them or assist them. But great to be here, and delighted to hear the presentations.
Absolutely. Another kind of fun fact about Montana is that it's actually it holds the #1 position in the US for securing an NIH National
funding,
award. So massive amount of investment going into the state of Montana at the moment. And I think from the presentation that Kendall talked about with Inimmune, they have been very fortunate to receive significant investment in the past 2 or 3 years or so, approximately, I think about 50 million since about 2018. So yeah, there's certainly a lot of innovation happening in Montana at the moment. So certainly, not only myself from an Enterprise Ireland perspective, but also from the people on the panel today, we'd be more than happy to begin to explore potential collaboration in the state of Montana. But before we do that, I want to quickly turn to Ciarán Daly of Health Beacon. So Ciarán, we've heard from the Consul General around, Irish-American relationships and partnerships. We've heard from Paul O'Connell around the digitization of supply chain. We've just heard from Matt around, what the future of innovation will look like from a biopharmachem perspective. Kieran, as the founder of a highly successful Irish company that's managed to establish itself in the US, expand, from its Boston base, secure partnerships with leading companies throughout the country here, what are your thoughts on, the direction of the healthcare value chain? I mean, perhaps broadly speaking from a digitization perspective or otherwise, and how do you see other companies continuing, or other companies as well as Health Beacon continuing to make an impact in the US moving forward?
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. So I think in terms of, I suppose, first of all, this whole, COVID-19 and what that's driven in terms of acceleration of digitization, really, of the whole value chain. And I think that's something that, you can pick a number, whether it accelerated by 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years in terms of really kind of population level training of folks with digital tools. So not only have we become, experts at Zoom, we can control the mute button, we can turn our stuff into cats, we can do a whole range of skills that society didn't have, probably a year or two ago. And I think that's helped us really, I suppose, to kind of break down those barriers, perceived or in fact real, about how people can adopt and adapt to digital. And I think, that's happening at a population level, but that happens acutely really in healthcare. And I think, there's been probably a gradual, bit of a staggered approach towards digitization over the last number of years, but certainly the global pandemic has accelerated that. And at Health Beacon, a lot of our mission is around care and treating people in the home and extending that continuum of care from hospitals into a home setting. And I think that's something that historically there might have been biases against, but sometimes it's in a needs must situation. I mean, it's been amazing what's happened in terms of primary care and secondary care and community care over the last 12 months. The vaccine itself is a fantastic representation of that. I mean, if you look at the collaboration and cooperation that it took to go from creating to executing and putting shots in people's arms in 12 months, it's phenomenal. And I think you could say that that business and industry has succeeded in ways that perhaps nations haven't. We've seen kind of multi-speed responses to the pandemic at a nation level, but industry has really come up trumps in terms of delivering those solutions for people. So I think from the point of view of digitization, I think it's accelerated it. I think it's here to stay. We've heard earlier, is it a pandemic converting to an endemic? Kind of, who knows? But sure. I think for sure, lots of things have changed in the world that won't change back. And I think people have got a kind of taste of the kind of acceleration of digitization, and that's really, really strong. I think from the point of view of what you do to make digitization more sticky, I think for us, we're really looking at trying to make technology accessible and accessible for all. We've got supporting patients across 13 different countries, obviously including the US, and everyone from pediatric use cases to folks into their 80s and 90s. So I think when we think about digital, it has to be very inclusive from the get-go, and that's a whole separate talk and bunch of thoughts about how that can happen. And I think that's something that in terms of other companies and thinking about where you focus, that making it accessible, I think, is something that's really key, because turning something digital is fine, but you got to get it used. And I think the second piece of that equation is really looking at the systems that digital fits into. It's not a case of, okay, I'm going to digitize a paper system and just drop it in. I think there needs to be much more concentrated effort to think about what happens in that the whole continuum of care, as you touched on in the question. And I think that's something that I'm not sure if that work will ever be done. It's kind of something that you have to keep pushing and thinking about what system changes and what systems you're dropping your digital solutions into. So I think that that's probably some of my thoughts in terms of the digitization question, and in terms of companies looking to expand and integrate and develop in the US. I think without going too long, and I think the first thing is you've got to commit to the market, whether it's the US or any other market. We opened in the US in probably 4 or 5 years ago now at this point. And we selected Boston, and for sure some of those big cities have a concentration of talent and skill set, but by no means do they have a monopoly. And I think that's from hearing the companies today and even our own experience as we kind of push further into some of the other parts of the US, that's become apparent. I mean, the spread of talent and markets and so forth is very well distributed. So I think, commit to the market, be in it for the long haul. I think they're probably some of our guiding principles as we made our way through the US and beyond.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kieran. I couldn't agree with you more. That certainly while, states along the East Coast may be the first port of call for companies seeking to kind of land and expand in the US, they certainly don't have a monopoly on the talent and on the innovation that I think is coming forth. From my perspective, Brigitte, I'm not sure if we wanted to leave some time for Q&A at the back end. I know that, Robert wanted to kind of say some final words before we wrap up. We've about 10 minutes left or so. So I might turn it over to you and defer to yourself with regards to next steps.
Sure. Thanks, Jenny.
Sure.
I wanted just to quickly answer the question that showed up in the Q&A, and then I think we had a couple come in. The question was from Rob. Aside from Tonix, or any of the other companies from Montana supporting demand or presently collaborating with companies, employees, partners, Europe, more specifically Ireland? So Rob, while I can't speak for the folks on the panel, and Kendall added a comment there, I did want to let you know, I just took a quick inventory, just top of mind, sitting on my desk here today. And just in Missoula, which is the town where I'm from, I know that Rocky Mountain Bio, which is a company that produces serum and protein fractions, is selling into Ireland. Montana Bioagriculture has licensed technology to a firm in Ireland. They're involved with aquaculture. It's fish food, basically. Technical Sourcing International is a globally known nutraceutical supplier. They have sales into Ireland, and then Sunburst Sensors also has a relationship with Ireland. And that doesn't even scratch the surface of what's probably occurring on the research and development side. These things that I don't know, but obviously the University of Montana and Montana State University are very actively engaged in performing research relevant to the pharmaceutical industry and beyond, and they're always seeking partners outside and beyond our borders that would complement their expertise. Anyway, I'm going to just turn it over to Christina to see what we have for question. What do we have there, Christina?
We have a question for the Ireland panel and perhaps for the Montana side too. What types of partnerships are most important to you in achieving your targeted growth?
Maybe we go to the companies first, or Matt, or I don't know.
Well, I might maybe make a blanket statement coming from the company side in the interest of time. Brigitte, the business of biotech and pharmaceutical business is very global. And that happens all the way from the research side, as you were talking about, all the way to the production and distribution side. And I have a small company. We have a dozen people doing drug development, but we have major collaborations in Europe and Japan. And we're always looking for the smartest people who have the best ideas that we can collaborate with. And we're very geographic independent. And I think that's true probably for all the companies working out of Montana. It's very common for us to look overseas and reach into the talent and expertise in Europe and other countries.
I think from the Ireland perspective, also to just follow on from what Rob had said, what we found is that the appetite for collaboration, as I mentioned before, has not slowed down. I think when the pandemic first hit, we were a little unsure as to how this would affect collaboration and partnership between SMEs, larger companies, that kind of thing. What we found is that across the board, from healthcare systems, hospitals, medical centers, multinational corporations. Nobody really wants to get caught in the back foot, which I feel like there was a kind of a bit of a scramble when COVID-19 first hit last year. So what we've found is that innovation throughout the entire pipeline, right the way from concept, two guys in a garage, all the way through to, you know, revenue generation, companies, you know, the appetite for engagement and for collaboration has only increased. Really, from an Enterprise Ireland perspective, we have been foot to the floor for a long time now, in terms of facilitating introductions, facilitating collaborations on behalf of our companies into partner companies in the US. So I would say, you know, from any stage of that innovation pipeline, we're seeing huge amounts of interest across the board.
I don't know if Paul or Kieran wanted to comment specifically on behalf of their firms, just curious, just to get a little more granular.
Yeah, I think from a Titan Solutions perspective, I think we're very interested in, you know, engaging with companies that are looking to the future in terms of, you know, how to become more agile, how to really move that dial within their business, right? Because we talk on a day-to-day basis about companies that have that sort of competing dynamic about, on the one hand, increasing sort of customer demand, and then on the other hand, you know, they're under pressure in terms of, you know, costs and taking cost out within their businesses. And I think for us, it's really engaging with companies where, you know, there's a real appetite for looking at digital supply chain technology that sits in the middle of that, and allows companies actually become very agile, and really move that dial, as I said, and have a resilient supply chain.
Great. And on the Health Beacon side, if I may, just quickly, I think on the you know, for me and for our company, partnerships are something that have to be quite deliberate and collaboration. And I think it's such an essential, you know, even thinking about the question, it's as essential as sales these days, I would argue, you know, in terms of how you partner and collaborate. And for us, we're always looking at people with, I will say, not just local kind of domain expertise, but local system expertise, particularly in the US, where, you know, it's no secret, it's a complicated healthcare system. So we're continually looking at people who might be, you know, have good, you know, adjacencies, and kind of mutually beneficial, you know, win-win type of agreements and arrangements to be had. So we're quite focused on folks that are kind of in market and have expertise that are adjacent, you know, a step or two ahead or to the left or to the right of the kind of work we're doing.
We find that from a partnership perspective, that increasingly we look to horizontal partnerships as well, and especially when you talk about going on a digital journey, you find yourself drawn into areas which you had no knowledge of or idea of. And I find myself increasingly at meetings being just about following what's going on as we start to talk to companies who specialize in blockchain and various digital technologies, which for a mere chemist, which I am, is a big learning experience. But I think that what's great about Ireland is the fact that we do have each of these sectors present here, and the opportunity to partner is something that we're starting to exploit at the moment. And that can easily transition across the Atlantic to the USA as well. So I think that the future is going to be horizontal. I think that's inevitable, and vertical or siloed activity, I think, will become less and less common if you want to stay in the game or stay competitive.
Excellent. Thanks for your comments too, Matt. So we are drawing near to our close of this session. So what's next? I would like there to be a next, and we want to be a part of helping to facilitate that. So you'll be relieved to know that we don't have our own wazoo matchmaking platform that you have to learn and figure out. We're going to do this old school. So if you are interested in connecting with any of the panelists that are on this call, or firms in Montana or industry association partners here in Montana, and I'm going to guess our friends in Ireland will reciprocate here, please just reach out to Montana World Trade Center. Our website is mwtc.org. It was in the chat session, and we will help to facilitate that connection post haste, because we want to take the next step here and make this an impactful event. Robert, you've got last word here. You want to close us out?
Thanks, Brigida. And just want to say that was a wonderful hour and a half, really engaging, some really interesting conversation. And I think there is definitely potential there for it to be taken up again. I want to thank World Trade Center Montana and World Trade Center Dublin, the Montana High Tech Alliance, and of course my colleague Jenny Lynch, Enterprise Ireland, and everyone who took part in the panels, because we all brought our A game today, and it was great to see. I mean, I think just to close, I'd say, you know, the ambassador alluded to this earlier on. I mean, there's a very old relationship between Ireland and Montana. When I think of Ireland's relationship with the West Coast, the road really drives through Montana. It was the first stopping off point for a lot of our people before they made their way down south into California or over into Washington State and up into Alaska. And you know, anyone who's visited Montana from Ireland, I will say it's a place that feels very familiar and very much like home, just by virtue of the enormous formative impact that Irish people had. There is a Cork town and a Dublin town in Butte, and I am certain that they are the only place in America where I've seen them use the word grand in an appropriate context. It really does feel like home. And I think for people who are coming from Montana and looking at Europe and looking at figuring out how they engage in Europe, they'll find people who obviously English speaking in the European Union, very similar way of doing business, very similarly open to collaboration and those partnerships, because like Montana, Ireland is a place that isn't in a major metropolitan area, and we know that to survive in this world, to make our way, we need to be resilient and we need to be innovative, and they are characteristics that both of us share. So I suppose without further ado, I want to thank everyone again, and to encourage hopefully more collaborations, and really hope that we can see all the Montana visitors in Ireland, and also that we might see some more Irish visitors in Montana, because it's a very special place with great people. So good evening, Olga. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.